Hi everyone, Rob Watson here. Just to kind of give you a bit of feedback of what I've been up to, which is not very much at all because I've had flu or COVID, can't really tell which was which. Haven't had a test, but it's been like nearly 2 weeks that I've been out of action really. I've done bits and pieces and little things, and it's just been kind of a long drawn out process of feeling like rubbish for most of the time. So I'm behind on things at the moment. That's not to say that I've not been doing anything or not been watching what's going on in the world, but really to say that, you know, it's been a bit painful. So temperature control has been the thing that's gone out the window, and so I can sit in relative cool, and then I'll get hot, and then I can't concentrate, and then it feels like you're drunk. You know that feeling that you get when you've got a hangover and you've not processed all the alcohol, and you still feel a bit drunk first thing in the morning after a party, after the night before. Well, I was feeling like that. You'd get up and then you'd feel bad. So still not completely recovered, but, you know, kind of gradually making progress. Anyway, I just want to kind of share some thoughts on some things that have kind of come my way over the last few days. Primarily, I think the podcast that with GenSpec with Marcus Evans was really interesting. I've written a blog about that and about the relationship between a kind of Freudian Kleinian model of thinking about the psyche and developmental interruptions and disruptions in people's sense of development and sense of identity, that kind of thing, which is going on a lot with gender identity issues, and then contrast that with a Jungian model. I was interested. I'm reading a biography about Jung at the moment, and I'm slowly working through it as I can concentrate when I can. And the issue really is that Freud was, according to Jung, was analytically driven. He was an extroverted thinker in Jung's terms. And he was driven by breaking things down into compartments and breaking things down into categories, which is the analytical model, which is a really important, it's been a very effective model of comprehension. But Jung talks about himself as being a synthetic thinker, where you build things up and you look at it, if you like, holistically, and you look at the way that it operates in a more process-focused way and a developmental way. So if you think about an useful analogy I was toying with, and I'm not really sure whether this is appropriate, but if you think about, you know, you look at a car, a motor vehicle, a modern motor vehicle, and you think about how it operates. So you start to take it apart, you look at the individual components, and eventually get to the engine, and you start to look at what is it that makes the engine go. Now, you know, we can, obviously there's electric vehicles, but there's internal combustion engines. And one of the category mistakes, if you like, that I think maybe Freudianism in its kind of more pure form has made, is that it's not distinguished between different types of drives and processes. So there's a kind of assumption that everything is subsumed into one particular model of process. But if you look at a car and an internal combustion engine, if it's driven by petrol, which is the fuel, the energy draws its energy from the ignition of combustible material. But in a petrol engine, that combustion is produced by a spark. In a diesel engine, that combustion is produced by compression and by, you know, kind of the pressure that's built up. It produces a burst of energy, which pushes it back against the piston. So you can actually misunderstand what is the driving force, but you look at it and say, well, it's a combustion engine, so they all operate the same. And there's a bit of a sense of that, is that you're not clear about what the analytical model is. You've got to keep going into it. But the further that you go into it, the further you get away from what the use value is of that. And it's like, yes, you understand what the function is of an internal combustion engine, but what does a car mean to people? So Jung would look at this and say, well, a car it's not just a practical tool. It is there, but it's not just that. It's also a symbol, and it represents something, and it means something to people, and people use it in their lives, and it has a sense of status and a sense of power. So what we're kind of looking at sometimes, I think, with some of these debates, and this is what was really illustrative and interesting with the discussion for the GenSpect podcast, was really about how you can go down a route which doesn't give you the whole picture. And I think one of the things I'd like to see is, I mean, it's really important to look, if you're taking your car to the garage and it won't start, you need your mechanic to understand that it's, what kind of internal combustion engine there. If you tell them it's a petrol engine and it's not, it's a diesel engine, well, you've been putting the wrong fuel into it and it's never going to work. So, that kind of thing. So you need your analysts, your psychological helpers, the people who can help correct imbalances and problems and breaks and things like that. You need somebody who understands how this works on a kind of mechanical, functional level. But when you're in a situation where you're saying, well, look, this isn't just a personalised, and this I think is the challenge, I think, really, is that we're thinking about some of these issues as over-personalised to the individual. And I think Jung would have looked at this and said, well, what's in the collective? What is it in the society? What is it in the culture? And what Jung termed the collective unconscious. What are those things that we're blind to, that we're not aware of, that we're unconscious of, that are trying to come forward? So Freud, as far as I understand, kind of looked back at kind of a sense that it was repression for things which existed in our formative periods, our childhood, our early childhood, and that there's these drives and that they bring about feelings of shame or feelings of discomfort. But actually, and part of the split between Jung and Freud was that Jung kind of said, no, hang on a minute. What if our dreams, what if this symbolic material that comes up from the unconscious, what about these images that come through are actually trying to point us in the direction of something? And I don't think we've done enough work in those terms. And I'd like to understand and like to get a sense of what the symbolic nature of people's dreams are, where these things are kind of enacted, where these things, it's not just about suppressing your fears, but it's also about, it's not just a series of wish fulfillments, they're actually challenges. And how do we approach these things? So that's kind of sketchy thinking, but there's a blog up on the website, robwatsonmedia.net, on the Travels in Metamodernity blog, as I've called it, which if you're interested in it, it'd be great to get some feedback about and some comments. And then also I was listening to the Trigonometry podcast with Graham Linehan, and I find it a really interesting and often challenging listen. But there's an interesting part which he went on to, which is about the transition from a high trust society to a low trust society, and the challenges that we're facing in Europe, about how we manage and transition between societies that are cohesive and societies that are challenged by fragmentation, by a sense of churn, a sense of cultural dislocation, and how our political, our cultural, our social debate and discussion about these things is quite polarised, and it's kind of parts of the discussion are celebrated, parts of the issue are celebrated, but parts are ignored, and people's fears and concerns are ignored. So it's, again, another area that I've looked at through the decentered media work that I do about social cohesion and the way that media applies to that. So there's just two things that kind of have come up in things that I've been looking at and watching, and I'll no doubt write something about that in the near future. So I'm feeling incredibly hot again now. I don't think wearing a fleece indoors is doing me any good, but I'll catch up with you again soon and speak to you. Let me just speak to you in the future. Speak to you soon.